Welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Kate Moody. My guest today is Jim Bridenstine, the administrator of the American Space Agency, NASA, who joins me at the 2019 Paris Air Show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
50 years ago, the first man arrived on the moon. Now NASA wants to send astronauts back. Why back to the moon?
So we like to use the word forward, not back. We're sending humans forward to the moon with the purpose of retiring risk. We want to learn how to live and work on another world, really for one purpose, and that is to go on to Mars. The challenge with Mars is that the Earth and Mars are on the same side of the sun once every 26 months. So when we go to Mars, we have to be willing to stay for a period of 2 years. The glory of the moon is that it's only a 3-day journey there and it's a 3-day journey home. And we can learn how to live and work on another world, prove the capability, prove the technology, and then take everything that we learn onto Mars. So the moon is a proving ground. Beyond all of the science that we can get from the moon and the resources that are at the moon, it's a proving ground for how to live and work on another world in a place where you know you can make it home safely if something goes wrong. We proved that in Apollo 13, and now we're going to use the moon as the proving ground for an eventual mission to Mars.
So it's sort of like setting up base camp on the moon.
I don't know if we're going to build a base camp per se, but certainly we're going to be in orbit around the moon with a small space station that we call Gateway, and we're going to have numerous missions on the surface of the moon, all over the moon at various times, so that we can learn more about the moon than we've ever known before. In the Apollo era, we landed on the surface of the moon 6 times with 12 humans that had the opportunity to walk on the surface of the moon. In each case, it was at the equatorial regions of the moon. So we missed a lot of the science. In 2009, 40 years after Apollo 11, we learned for the first time that there's hundreds of millions of tons of water ice at the south pole of the moon. We completely missed it for 40 years. So what we want to do now is go back to the moon, go back to all of the moon, learn everything there is to learn, but also learn how to live and work so we can go to Mars.
When you look back at that first landing 50 years ago, there was a real race between the United States and Soviet Union to get there first. Now you're talking more about international partnership. Is there a 21st century version of that space race?
I don't know if you'd call it a race in today's era, but back then you're absolutely right, it was. It was a contest of political systems, of economic systems, of technological prowess, and of course, whoever could get there first would be the winner. And of course, we all remember July 20th, 1969. Of course, I don't remember because I wasn't born yet. But of course, we read about it in the history books. We had that moment in time where everybody on the planet knew right where they were when we landed on the moon. Well, that was a wonderful generation. The new generation is very different. It's not a contest of political ideologies. Now it's about collaboration. And it's also about going with people that historically have never had the opportunity, namely women. The Vice President of the United States announced that this time when we go to the moon, we're going to go to the South Pole where the water ice is, and for the first time, we're going to send women to the moon. And that's important. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and I want her to see herself as having every opportunity I saw myself as having when I grew up. That's why going to the moon with women under a new program called Artemis, and Artemis is, of course, the twin sister of Apollo in Greek mythology. She is the goddess of the moon, and this time when we go to the moon, we're going to go with men and women.
So a little bit of a feminist twist to the 21st century version.
Absolutely.
Do you think that the moon might hold rare earths or resources that can be commercialized? And if so, should they be commercialized?
I think there is a possibility. We don't know. What we do know is that we have what we call rare earth metals on Earth, platinum group metals. We also know that those metals are not Earth metals at all. They're asteroid impacts from billions of years ago. The challenge with the Earth is we have this very active geology, a very active hydrosphere, a very active atmosphere. And so those metals are not today where they were billions of years ago. In fact, they're in very trace amounts when you can find them at all. Well, the moon doesn't have an active geology or an active hydrosphere, an active atmosphere, which means anything that impacted the moon a billion years ago is today right where it was a billion years ago. So I don't know what resources might be there in the form of precious metals, but certainly it's another reason to explore. I think it's an important capability we need to develop.
Now, NASA has said that it's going to start opening the possibility to private citizens to go up to the International Space Station. Why has there been that shift in policy?
So when we think about the International Space Station, we've now been in low Earth orbit for almost 20 years. It's an amazing tool of diplomacy. We've had astronauts from dozens of countries on the International Space Station. We've had 15 nations working or operating the International Space Station now for almost 20 years. And of course, we've had experiments from 103 different countries on the International Space Station. Here's the thing. We want to take all of what we've learned from a diplomatic perspective, and we want to apply it all the way to the moon for a sustainable return to the moon, or a sustainable moving forward to the moon and then on to Mars. So in order to make that happen, we need to take advantage of commercial industry in low Earth orbit. When we think about the medicines and the pharmaceuticals that are being developed on the International Space Station in a way that you cannot develop those medicines in a gravity well. We think about the idea that we're creating materials on the International Space Station in a way that you cannot create those materials on Earth because of the gravity well. And when we think about the ability to do things like print human organs in 3 dimensions on the International Space Station that you cannot do in a gravity well, what we're seeing is that there is a commercial marketplace for these activities in low Earth orbit where the private sector can invest and then capitalize on those investments. And then NASA could be a customer of many customers in low Earth orbit. And then we can take the resources that the taxpayers give us and go on to the moon and on to Mars. So the government should be doing what only the government can do and let the private sector do what the private sector does best.
So it is a real shift then. For example, to get people up to the ISS, you're going to be partnering with the likes of SpaceX and Boeing. Do you think that the future of exploration is likely to be privately rather than publicly funded, or will it be a mix?
It'll be a mix. So you're exactly right. This year we're going to launch what we call Commercial Crew. We're going to take American astronauts and launch them on commercial rockets where NASA is not owning and operating the rocket, but we're buying a service to get to and from the International Space Station. The interesting thing is there are seats on those rockets more than there are NASA astronauts that will be riding in those seats, which means if there's an industry desire to do experimentation on the International Space Station, we're going to open it up for that activity. If there's university desire, research desire, if there's international partnership desire to go to the International Space Station and do research, we want to open it up for that activity. So the answer is NASA wants to be one customer of many customers in a robust commercial marketplace in low Earth orbit, and we want to have numerous providers that are competing on cost and innovation. The goal being to drive down cost and increase access to space for all of humanity and do it in a commercial way so that we can focus our resources on going back to the moon and onto Mars.
Coming back down to Earth, how does NASA see its role in protecting the environment? Does it have an environmental policy?
So NASA right now is studying the Earth from space in every part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And in fact, if you look at NASA's budget for Earth science right now, it is higher than it has ever been in American history. And so yes, we will continue to gather the data and share the data with the world for free, because it's what our agency does. What NASA does not do, and I've got to be really careful about this, we don't prescribe what to do about what we're learning. We leave that to policymakers. All we do is we collect the data and we share the data with the world so that policymakers can make good decisions.
You've supported President Trump's plan for a Space Force or Space Corps, depending on which one gets through. Why is that? Do you think it's a productive use of resources?
I absolutely do. You know, I will tell you, when you think about space, it has elevated the human condition. We think about how we communicate. This is on television. People will watch this maybe satellite TV, or maybe they're going to watch it on the internet. I come from rural Oklahoma in the United States. A lot of people only have the internet because of space-based internet capabilities. So the way we communicate is dependent on space. It's a multi-hundred-billion-dollar industry at this point, but it's also how we navigate. We think about GPS. We think about the timing signal from GPS, which is required for every banking transaction. We think about how we predict weather, how we understand how the Earth is changing. We think about how we produce food and how we produce energy. because of NASA technology, we're able to feed more of the world than ever before. So we think about how space has elevated the human condition. And then we hear people talk about using space. Some countries have called space the American Achilles heel. In other words, if they can destroy space, they can destroy the United States of America. Well, we need to make sure that the United States is making the investments such that all of the world knows that you cannot destroy space no matter how much investment you make. And if we can do that, then they won't make those investments to begin with, and then NASA will be able to continue doing what it does, which is do the research and the exploration and the discovery. I think it's also important, I have to be clear as the NASA administrator, we don't do national security and defense, we do exploration and research, and we partner with countries that many times it's difficult for us to partner with in a terrestrial environment, but in space we can partner.
Do you believe that there's life somewhere out there in the universe beyond Earth?
It's a wonderful question, and I'll say this, because this is fun, and it's important, and it makes us talk about a driver. This is what drives us to explore. In the last year, we have discovered complex organic compounds on the surface of Mars. Now, that doesn't mean that there's life there necessarily, but the building blocks for life are on Mars. They don't exist at all on the moon. Of course, they're all over Earth, and now we know that they're all over Mars. We also know that the methane cycles on Mars are commensurate with the seasons of Mars. So the probability of finding life just went up yet again. We also found this year that there's liquid water on Mars, 12 kilometers under the surface of Mars, where that liquid water is protected from the radiation of deep space. Again, the probability for finding life, what do we know about water on Earth? Everywhere there's liquid water, there's life. Is that true on Mars? We don't know, but I think we should find out. So am I talking about finding bunny rabbits on Mars? Absolutely not. What I am talking about is the possibility that we could find microbial life on Mars and or find evidence that life existed at one time on Mars. That's why we are driven to explore.
Lots more exploration and discovery to come. Jim Bridenstine, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, my honor.
And thank you for watching France 24. Stay tuned, there's more news and analysis coming up.